Hello's my YouTube family. There are stories that never made it to the news. Whispers buried deep and where no light reaches. Secrets too dark for the world to believe. I search the blackest corners of the internet and far beyond to bring you the truth they tried so hard to erase. Tales that were deleted, covered up, abandoned in digital shadows. But fear remembers everything. These are not just stories. They're warnings. And if you're still watching, if you're still here, it's already too late. Welcome to Fears, and now let the horror begin.
It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, a chance to escape the noise of everyday life, to unwind and reconnect with nature. Chelse had heard about this secluded cabin in the woods from a friend who had described it as the perfect place for some quiet time away from the world. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves, the wind in the trees, and the occasional bird call. Chelse, a woman in her late 20s, arrived at the cabin on a crisp Friday evening. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving a thick blanket of darkness over the forest. The cabin looked inviting, with its warm glow spilling from the windows and the smell of wood burning in the air. Her phone had no signal. It didn't matter. Chelse was used to being offline during trips like this. She unpacked her bags, made herself a cup of tea and settled down in front of the fireplace, enjoying the crackling sounds as the flames danced. The isolation was comforting, and for a moment, she felt like she was the only person in the world. But that peace was shattered the next night. Around midnight, as Chelse was preparing for bed, she heard something strange. A noise from outside. At first, she thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, louder this time. A distinct scraping sound against the cabin's wooden walls. Chelse froze, her heart racing. She lived alone in the city, and the silence of the forest was starting to feel too loud. Cautiously, she approached the window and peered outside, but saw nothing. Only the dark, dense trees surrounding the cabin. The noise stopped for a moment, but her instincts told her something wasn't right. She double-checked that the doors were locked and the windows secured before heading to bed. Around 2 a.m., the noise returned, louder and more urgent. This time, it was unmistakable. Someone was out there. The scraping sound turned into footsteps, then muffled whispers. Chelse's breath caught in her throat. She knew she wasn't imagining things. Someone was definitely outside. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Maybe a lost traveler. But the remote location of the cabin made that unlikely. She grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife, her hands trembling, and crept to the door. She listened carefully. Footsteps were circling the cabin now, slow and deliberate, as though whoever was out there knew she was awake and was toying with her. The door handle suddenly jiggled. Chelse's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the door, holding her breath. The handle rattled again, but the door didn't open. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to break in. They were testing her. She waited. The minutes felt like hours, the silence unbearable. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing heavily just outside her window. It was so close now, she could feel the pressure of their presence in the air. Terrified, Chelse turned off the flashlight, retreating into the darkest corner of the room. She clutched the knife, her knuckles white. Her mind raced for a plan, but nothing seemed to make sense. If she called for help, there was no signal. If she tried to escape, she'd have to go through the woods in the middle of the night with no idea who or what was out there. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft tap on the window, followed by a voice low and cold. "I know you're in there, Chelse." Her blood turned to ice. How did they know her name? For a moment she was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even speak. The voice continued, now more menacing. "I've been watching you for hours. There's nowhere to run." Chelse's mind raced. She remembered a small unlocked back door leading to the woods. If she could make it there, she could run. She made a split-second decision, bolting from her hiding spot and darting toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, she heard a noise behind her. Footsteps, fast and determined. They were coming. Her heart pounded in her chest as she yanked open the door and sprinted into the night. The cold air hit her like a slap, but she didn't slow down. She had no idea where she was going, only that she had to get away. Chelse ran through the trees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't dare look back, but the sound of heavy footsteps following her pushed her forward, faster and faster, until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw headlights in the distance. A car. Without thinking, she ran straight toward it, waving her arms desperately. The car screeched to a halt. The driver, a man in his 40s, threw open the door. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he shouted, clearly startled. Chelse didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the passenger seat, and the man slammed the door behind her. The car sped off into the night, leaving the cabin and whatever was out there far behind. As they drove away, Chelse looked back at the dark woods, her heart still racing. The driver kept asking questions, but Chelse couldn't answer. Her mind was still spinning, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She had narrowly escaped death, but she didn't know who or what had been out there. And she wasn't sure she ever wanted to know. It was supposed to be an ordinary camping trip. Kai, an avid hiker and outdoor enthusiast, had long dreamed of spending a few nights alone in the wilderness. He'd been to this particular forest many times, trekking through the trees during the day, but never staying overnight. This time he wanted to experience the solitude, the calm and the stillness of the forest at night. On the first day, the trip was everything Kai had hoped for. He set up his camp near a small creek, enjoyed the peaceful sounds of nature, and even managed to get a fire going as the sun dipped below the horizon. The crackling of the fire and the scent of pine were the perfect backdrop for a relaxing evening alone. As the night deepened, the air grew cooler, and Kai settled into his tent, wrapped in a sleeping bag. The sounds of the forest seemed to fade as the fire's glow flickered, but then something odd happened. The quiet night was broken by a sound, something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong. At first, Kai thought it was just the wind, but the rustling in the canopy above him was different. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. He lay still, listening. The sound came again, louder now, a series of soft, almost whispering voices carried on the wind. Kai sat up in his tent, straining to hear. It wasn't just the wind or the trees moving. There were words in those whispers, voices, faint but distinct, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. It sent a chill down his spine. Panic gnawed at him. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. But the voices grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the canopy above the camp, like they were circling the trees, waiting for something. Unable to ignore it any longer, Kai grabbed his flashlight and unzipped his tent, stepping cautiously into the night. The air was cold against his skin, and the forest was unusually quiet now, the whispers having stopped. He shone the beam of the flashlight upwards into the trees, but saw nothing, just the thick canopy of branches and leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Still, something felt wrong. Kai's instincts screamed at him to leave. He packed up his things quickly, but as he did, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, sharper, as if they were right beside him, urging him to stop and listen. He froze, eyes darting through the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. But the forest was silent again, save for the faintest rustle of leaves above. Kai had to get out of there. He grabbed his backpack and began hiking away from the campsite, but the path he thought he knew seemed unfamiliar. The trees, though they looked the same, felt different now, as if they were closing in on him, bending toward him in a way that felt unnatural. Every few steps he would hear a whisper, a voice calling his name, faint but distinct. Kai. It came from all directions, making him feel as though the forest itself was alive, aware of him, tracking him. Kai quickened his pace, breaking into a full run as his panic rose. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled over rocks and roots. He had no idea where he was going anymore, only that he had to get away from the voices. Then, just when he thought he couldn't run any farther, he saw something up ahead, a faint light. He wasn't sure if it was real, but he didn't care. He sprinted toward it, hoping it was another hiker, a cabin, or a sign of civilization. As he neared the light, it became clear. It was the glow of his own campfire, still burning at the original campsite. He stopped dead in his tracks. How could that be? He had just left the campsite. He couldn't have come back so quickly. His mind spun as he took a cautious step forward, the eerie whispers returning with renewed intensity. The air around him felt thick, heavy with a presence he couldn't understand. The fire flickered wildly, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the whispering voices stopped. The fire sputtered and died, leaving Kai in total darkness, the oppressive silence of the forest closing in around him. Out of the corner of his eye, something moved, a figure, just beyond the reach of the dying embers. Kai's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward it, but there was nothing there. The voices had stopped, but the fear that gripped him didn't. His body was frozen in place, and he knew one thing with a certainty that chilled him to the core. He wasn't alone. It wasn't a tea until the first light of dawn that Kai found his way out of the forest. When he finally emerged, exhausted and shaken, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had been watching him the entire time. But no one believed him when he told them what happened. No one except the forest itself. Kai never returned to those woods. It started with a dare. Paul, Megan, and Gregory had always been the adventurous types, always seeking out new thrills, new stories to tell their friends. When they heard about the abandoned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of their town, it sounded like the perfect spot for their next explore. The stories surrounding the hospital were the stuff of local legend, rumors of strange occurrences, ghostly apparitions, and disturbing whispers that could be heard from within the crumbling walls. The hospital had been closed for years, its once grand halls now decaying and forgotten. The doors had been sealed long ago, but teenagers and thrill-seekers often found ways to sneak in. Most of them never returned with anything to prove they had been there. But for Paul, Megan, and Gregory, it was an opportunity to make their own mark on the legend. They arrived late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the property. The hospital loomed in the distance like a looming, decaying giant, its windows shattered and its roof caving in on itself. A sense of unease settled over the trio, but none of them dared show it. They had come this far and nothing was going to stop them. They found a broken window on the side of the building, large enough to crawl through. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old mildew and decay. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. "Let's get this over with," Gregory said, his voice echoing slightly in the emptiness. They ventured deeper into the building, flashlights illuminating the dark hallways and peeling walls. The hospital had once been a place of suffering, and the evidence was everywhere. Old medical charts, rusted equipment, and forgotten patient records littered the ground. Yet there was something more, something unsettling about the place. It wasn't just the decay, the abandonment. It was the sense that something was still here, watching them. As they wandered further into the building, they came across a large, decrepit room. The walls were lined with rusty beds, the metal frames bent and twisted. Old restraints hung from the walls, forgotten relics of a darker time. The floor was littered with scraps of paper, and one sheet caught Megan's attention. "Look at this," she whispered, bending down to pick it up. It was an old patient file, yellowed with age. The name on the file was Dr. Theodore Hawke. "The name rings a bell," Paul said, peering over her shoulder. Wasn't he the head doctor here? They say he was involved in some weird experiments on the patients. Megan nodded, her fingers brushing over the paper. The file had an unsettling note attached. Patient, unknown. Subject's fate remains undetermined. The note seemed strange. Something didn't feel right. Let's keep moving, Gregory urged, his voice sounding a bit more nervous now. But before they could leave, a sound echoed from the dark hallway outside the room. A soft, dragging noise like someone slowly scraping their feet across the floor. They froze. The sound grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" Paul called out, but there was no answer. Just the sound growing nearer and nearer. The group turned toward the hallway, flashlights trembling in their hands. Then from the darkness a figure emerged. A tall, thin man in an old doctor's coat, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were wide, wild, as though he hadn't slept in years. "Dr. Hawke?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Is that you?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly raised his hand, pointing toward the far end of the hall. As he did, an unsettling voice echoed through the empty space. A voice that wasn't his, but one that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a chill down their spines, and the figure of Dr. Hawke began to fade into the darkness, vanishing like smoke. The air grew colder and a heavy silence descended upon them. "Okay, that's enough. Let's get out of here," Gregory said, his voice cracking with panic. But as they turned to leave, they found the hallway behind them completely different. What had been an open space was now a maze of dark, narrow corridors, all leading deeper into the hospital. The whispers grew louder now, not just from the walls, but from the very air itself. The voices were everywhere, swirling around them, urging them to turn back, to leave before it was too late. "Something's wrong," Megan said, her breath quickening as the temperature in the room plummeted. "We need to get out now." But as they tried to retrace their steps, the hallways seemed to shift, moving and twisting, trapping them deeper inside. The floor beneath them creaked, as if the building itself was alive, shifting in response to their fear. Suddenly a loud bang echoed from the far side of the building, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. Something, or someone, was running toward them. They spun around, their flashlights flickering wildly, and saw nothing but darkness closing in. And then, from the shadows, came the voice again. "You shouldn't have come." Panic overwhelmed them. They ran blindly through the corridors, the sound of footsteps echoing in pursuit. Every turn they took seemed to lead them deeper into the building, further away from any exit. Finally, they stumbled into a small room with a single window. Desperate, they pried it open and scrambled through, tumbling out into the night air. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, hearts pounding in their chests. As they drove away, the lights of the hospital disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the unsettling feeling remained. They had made it out, but they knew something had followed them. It wasn't over. It was never over.
What you just heard, Han, was more than a story. It was a glimpse into what waits in the dark. Some truths should never be found, but now that you've heard them, they're coming closer. Subscribe while you still can. This was Fears. Until next time, keep your lights on.